we had our discussion. We got the initializer ready for our DB context. So we seeded a few roles, we added some users and so on. And then we went through these authorization requirements, right? So we actually went through and we set up all the annotations on the different controllers and actions and so on to implement pretty much as it's laid out here. That's as far as we got, but nobody stopped me. I threw this in at the bottom and we hadn't actually got to that point. So we didn't actually talk about this. So this is kind of a interesting twist on the other restrictions that we put in place, right? What if we wanted a supervisor to be able to delete a patient? Okay, remember, we have it up here. A supervisor cannot delete patients whatsoever, right? That's the way this initially was done. But what if we're going to say, well, if they entered the data for the patient, if they created the patient record, then we do want to allow them to delete it in that case, right? That's the kind of thing that comes up a lot in the real world. And here is where all that work we did earlier on, that great work we did getting our audit trail in place, our basic auditing is really going to pay off. Because remember how that worked. We added those 4 properties to, every class that implements the iAuditable interface, and that is the created by, created on, updated by, updated on, right? So with that information available, stored right in the database, because let me remind you how that works again. Let me just come back to Visual Studio here, right? I need my glasses on. There, that'll help. If we come down to the medical office context, right? Remember what we did? We added this HTTP context accessor so that when we construct our DB context, we can provide that, and that gives us access to the HTTP context, even though we're outside of an actual controller or web view, so to speak. And this gives us what? It gives us the user.identity.name. In other words, the name of the currently logged in user. Now, we have this in place if nobody's logged in. That's where we were always getting unknown, right? Of course, we're putting in seed data for the records that were added just in our seed data approach, right? As we were seeding the initial data. And that's where, if we went in and started editing and adding records, you'd go and look in the database table and you'd see, okay, well, the person being blamed at that point is unknown, right? Because they weren't logged in. But now that we have the ability to log in, we can use that. And that becomes our username. So down here, way down where we do on before saving, right? For all the created on, updated, and so on, we're using the username, right? So now we'll be able to track and know, did this particular user, for example, create a record, right? By checking the created by property. So that will be something that's not too hard then. It'd be pretty straightforward for us to be able to call upon that information in addition, right, to what we have already about knowing who's authenticated and then make the decision. Can this supervisor delete this particular patient, right? So that's where I've added a couple more files since we were in here the other day, 2 little extras that I decided to tack on to step 19 here. So one is to deal directly with that issue, right? So you can bring up this file and follow along with it as well, right? And but I'm just going to do it in Visual Studio. So what we essentially have then is a decision to make. Now, before we go on, the first thing we have to do is make a change to the restriction, right? So this is in the patient controller, okay? So we come down to the patient controller, and again, I'm going to go my Control M O keyboard combination to shrink everything down so I can find my way up and down to the different actions. So this is all about the delete action. Now, remember, what we did is we followed that map there, and so we set it so only the admin role, somebody who's in the admin role, would be allowed to do the delete. Please bear with me as I emphasize once more, make sure that you have matching annotations always on both the get and the post for any of the actual CRUD operations, any of the actions that change data, right? Okay, so in order to even give hope for a supervisor to be able to come in and actually delete a patient, we do need to modify that, right? So we need to change the annotation here so that both admin and supervisor are allowed to even implement these actions or call upon these actions to happen. Okay, so that's good. So that gives me the basics that I have to have done first. Then I'm going to add a bit of logic to deal with our kind of exceptional situation here, right? So, by the way, let me emphasize this as well. Just like we always do things, same protection on both a get and a post, we know that it's really the post. That's where any data changes actually happen. The get is usually just retrieving data and getting things ready to display on the screen. It's in the post that we actually do anything. So again, it's important that in the post, that's where we have the actual protection to make sure that these rules don't get broken. Okay, that'll happen in the post. But it makes sense to actually, as soon as if a supervisor comes along, they click the link to delete a patient, we want to inform them right away, right? Why let them think they can do it and let them try to delete the patient only to say, no, no, you can't do that because you didn't create them, right? We'll try to give them a heads up right away. So we end up putting very similar code essentially in both the get and the post, right? Now, I would do this because we're going to actually need to check who created this patient. This is going to have to come back after, sorry, it'll have to come after the link query where we go and we get the patient from the database, right? So it has to come after that. So I would, by all means, just let it check for null first. So I would put this code right here, right before we return view. Okay, so again, I'm working in the get for patient. We've gone to the database. We actually have the patient record. So that allows me to do what? It allows me to make a decision. Well, I might as well get the code in place and we'll talk about it here. First of all, I can check, do I have someone who's in the role of supervisor? Okay, I do. All right, so that's good. So if they're a supervisor, then I'm going to check, because they could be here as an administrator as well, right? So I just want to check, are they a supervisor? Okay, then I can go to the patient record that we just pulled from the database, check the created by property, and see if it matches the current logged in user, user.identity, and that's the name. Now, of course, the name, okay, is actually technically the way we've set it up, the email address, right? That's what we're using. We log in by using an email address as the username. But that's okay because that's also the same information that's stored in created by. So this way we see, did they create it? And if they didn't, if it's not, okay, not equal to, right, then we're going to take advantage. Remember back in the delete view, it wasn't there originally scaffolded, but we added, okay, if I come down to patient, right, in the delete view, we added this validation summary at the top. We did that earlier so that if we have a model error, like referential integrity constraint or something like that, that when we go to ask for a delete operation in the database and it says no, referential integrity is preventing that, right, foreign key constraint error type of thing, we have somewhere to actually give that feedback to the user. So we did, it wasn't scaffolded, but we added this line and we're going to take advantage that obviously it's a nice easy place to then send a message to the user, right? So we do that by adding a model error to our model state and just explaining, as a supervisor, you can't delete this person, right? You didn't enter them into the system, and that's all there is to it. But I thought, as well, why tempt them to click the button again? So I'm just throwing a little something into view data here. I'm just calling it no submit. And it's just a little snippet of HTML, disabled equals disabled. Well, you probably recognize that. We're going to just stick it into the HTML of the actual button to disable the button so they can't even try to click on it, right? So coming back to the delete view, okay, just coming down here, right near the bottom, here's the actual submit button is. So that's where I'll throw that in. I'll just throw in my @ okay, that gets me into the Razor code. View data, no submit, okay? So if it's empty, right, then it won't add anything to the HTML of the page, but if it has that text values, disabled equals disabled, then that will actually disable the submit button, right? So that should get the job done when they initially come to get a patient to delete, right? In the actual get action. Okay, so that's good. But remember, there are lots of tools out there that would let a user, even at that point, try to circumvent the system and find a way, even if we've disabled the submit button, to actually go in and do the submit in code, right? Or using a tool like Fiddler, et cetera, et cetera. So that isn't enough. We actually have to come down to the post as well and put a similar kind of protection in here. Now, again, it's got to come after the link query because we have to, confirm once more, right, that the patient was whether they were created by this supervisor user or not. Okay. So I would typically put this after that and right before the try catch. There's no point even going on. And what we'll do is we'll actually return before we even get to the try catch. So the code is almost the same as what we put in the get, but not quite. Okay. All right. So we are going to go back to the view once more, passing the patient. So it is makes sense to actually put the no submit in, so the button is still disabled once again. The same message is there, right? But because we're returning view, okay, that line prevents going on and doing the attempt because we're exiting this method at that point in time. Okay, notice we didn't have return view up here, right? Because it was going to come at the end anyway. Okay, so that's the slight change in the logic here that we do in the post. That way we guarantee we don't even try to do the delete because we go right back and return from our action at that point in time. All right. I think that's pretty straightforward, but I thought I'd just go through it step by step and we'll just test to make sure that it actually works. So thank goodness I have all my users and roles seeded, and I think my browser should remember them so I don't have to enter the passwords all over again myself. Here's hoping. Come on, Brave. Be brave. You can do it. There we go. All right. So if I try to get there, okay, I'll be forced to log in anyway. So let me log in as a supervisor. Okay. All right, so if I pick somebody, anybody, because I didn't create any of this, it's all seeded. If I select delete now, if if I did this first before I even change the code at all, I just get that access denied page, basically, right? But no, here we come. Are you sure you want to delete this patient? Ah, but there's my warning. As a supervisor, you cannot delete this one because you didn't enter them, right? And it's maybe a little hard to see on my screen here, but you can see the delete button. It's a little bit faded, right? And as I hover over it, nothing happens. I can click and nothing happens. That's just because it's disabled, right? Now, I'm not going to take time to try and circumvent the system and try and force it to delete anyway, but we do know that we have the code in place that will take care of that as well. All right, let me just come back here. Let's just actually, as a supervisor, I'll just come in, I'll create a patient, okay? Throw in an OHIP number, first name. Fortunately, it's offering to fill in a whole bunch of this stuff for me. I just need a doctor. Okay, so I created a patient. Now I did that as my logged in user. So if I go find that patient, I could do it a couple ways. I could search for Stovall, or I could do my drop-down list of doctors, right? But there it is. So I select delete. See, no warning, right? Because my logic has confirmed that yes, indeed, I created this. Okay, that's right in the audit history of this patient that I was the one who originally created the record. So I am allowed to come in here and delete. There we go. All right. Any questions about that? Okay. Well, just to break it up, I'll stop the recording.